Joining us back on stage is Nancy Green, along with our 4 speakers.
Let's giving our speakers a little heads up. You could be thinking about that. So the first question.
Hi there, this question is for Maggie. How do you think about the consequences/impact of the process of prototyping in healthcare design, especially in more high-risk or time-sensitive situations?
Go for it.
Hold on, I have one more for Maggie here around, do you see a place for behavioral science insights in your work? So maybe add that in as well.
Okay.
Also, wondering if within the current healthcare environment, having so much emphasis on improving and financial incentives on improving patient outcomes in order to lower cost, if the sort of design tools you worked on have produced variable clinical results in practice, will there be continued support of them moving forward, particularly thinking about the potential loss of ACA?
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to tackle these maybe in reverse-ish order. Okay. So thinking about the idea of cost. So the organization that I am a co-director for, the Patient Revolution, is a nonprofit that has spun out a little bit from a lot of this work that we've done. And that group, as its core mission, stands against the idea of healthcare as an industry, and really is trying to develop tools and programs that acknowledge that, in part because of the focus in healthcare, the systems have prioritized efficiency and revenue. And that one of the effects of that has been that we have decreased the amount of space and capacity within healthcare, and particularly within the people and systems within healthcare to care for each other, to be able to connect and offer a sort of healing experience, alleviating suffering. And so returning some of the focus within healthcare there to the idea of care is one of the fundamental parts of our sort of patient revolution work. As we also think about within the shared decision-making frame, we kind of actively encourage people not to pursue these shared decision-making tools for reasons of reducing cost or getting a specific outcome. I think that they can sound good in theory, but then the sort of straw man of it can fall apart pretty quickly. And so I can talk more about that because I don't want to take up all the time. But so we actively kind of move away from that. We do capture the data about it because it's interesting to know what effect it has, but we haven't really seen that the method that we use for creating tools, primarily because we don't focus on that, but doesn't have a predictable way of affecting cost or specific outcomes. We really focus on the idea of getting people to talk to each other, with the idea that that is going to craft the solution that's most meaningful to this person at this moment in time. The behavioral science, I think that there absolutely is place for collaboration, behavioral science, and the larger team that I work with at Mayo Clinic is made up of researchers from multiple disciplines that kind of inform that work. I think, again, a big part of what we try and sort of say so one of the big insights for me in sort of going out into the field and watching lots of these conversations is you realize, oh, well, patients, they have perfectly good reasons for not wanting to do some of the things that they don't want to do. And sometimes then when you look at the evidence, you find that the evidence is, it's not as black and white. I think that's one of the big problems that we have in our head, that medicine is very black and white. It's extraordinarily gray. And depending on your situation and your focus, different people can look at that information and come up in a different place. And so we've really tried to say that the solution is less about getting people to do what we think that they want to do and creating spaces and ways for people to connect and engage with each other as a way of working through those problems together, not in isolation, not leaving people abandoned to that, but trying to work together. And then the first question, remind me just.
Hello? I was impressed that you were able to answer those two, so I'm not surprised that you needed to be reminded. Okay. How do you think about the consequences and impacts of the process of prototyping in healthcare design? Specifically, in terms of dealing with high-risk populations as well as the time-sensitive nature of the work.
Right. So I think especially when we think kind of about shared decision making, we would never target a situation that was an acute situation or a situation in which it's not appropriate for patients to make decisions. You know, you don't want to wake patients up from a surgery to ask what kind of stitches they want or something like that. That's a obviously a bad idea. But I found that we sometimes, and this was my own experience, was that we have this idea that giving people information is going to be dangerous. And I think I've generally been disabused of that. That people have a lot of skills and capacity to be able to deal with these things. We specifically target a lot of our interventions to happen in clinical encounters. There is zero power in the tools that I've created. The things that they can do is they can create an on-ramp for two people to come together and be able to have a much more productive conversation. And so I have never seen that go badly. And so as that's been kind of reinforced, and we have the kind of catch-all of clinicians, I think that really has alleviated a lot of my fear for the specific type of work I do, which is different from testing a medication or something.
Okay, so I have one more for Maggie, and then I have two for Sunday.
Let's go to Sunday first.
We'll give you a break.
Yeah, break.
So the question is, we often incorrectly frame impact measurement as something that should happen at the end of a process. You mentioned that city officials use the City Resilience Index to help make decisions during the process. Could you expand on this and perhaps share an example of this?
Okay. Are those two questions or one?
The next one. Many small-scale interventions and small teams addressing these complex challenges. That's sort of a statement. And then what is the opportunity for collective action to make a greater impact?
So first, I totally agree with you. I want to first say that I'm not a designer and I'm not in the evaluation world. I spent, probably a couple of decades in the Foreign Service doing international development work. So I'm excited. I'm in the top right because I'm like, oh my gosh, I get to be in a room with a bunch of designers and folks who think and creatively and all of that. So I mention that in part because this is the kind of energy that colleagues have shared with me, and that we've all shared and experienced with a lot of these decision makers in cities about how do they proceed in terms of their planning, how do they understand better where they are in their cities, and what kinds of tools and when do they use these tools. So yes, evaluation shouldn't happen at the end of a project, and if our managing director for monitoring and evaluation were here, she would certainly be, she would give you a gold star for that. But where we've seen, particularly with the index, in terms of how managers are using these kinds of tools, is part of it is thinking differently about problem definition. Is that what is the problem that we're trying to address? And I think many of us don't understand fully what the problem is or what the problems are. We might have one sliver of it, but we don't have the full comprehensive picture of it. And sometimes problems don't lend themselves to have that kind of perspective or view. So this tool, the City Resilience Index, and I would suggest what I see as a thread here is understanding better what the problem is at the outset. And part of it is aligning people around then what is the vision that you're trying to move for. If this is the problem that you're trying to address, then then where are you trying to go? Like, what is that desired state? What is that aspiration that you're looking for? I love the who, what, wow. I think many of us start to think about that. And so the City Resilience Framework and Index really help cities to say, okay, if this is the desired state around what my city might look like in being resilient and being healthy and being safe and all of these things, where are my greatest challenges? Where are my greatest opportunities? And be able to use those things throughout the strategic planning processes that they've outlined for themselves, and for it to be done on an iterative, on an iterative basis. So I think that's part of it. And then on the second one, in terms of, can you repeat that again?
So the statement is, there are many small-scale interventions and small teams addressing complex challenges.
Yeah.
So the question is then, what is the opportunity for collective action to make a greater impact?
And I'm sure many of you here as well try to figure out, the crack the nut on scale question. How do we scale these great innovations that we're crowdsourcing, that we're finding? And it's a really, really challenging one. But a couple of thoughts that I want to share in terms of how the foundation approaches it. And one is where is the resources? And it's not all funding, but it is getting back to the notion of prototyping, of where is that capital there that may allow us to experiment and do so in a way that brings to the table in a more collective action way, brings to the table a variety of different people to be able to learn from that prototyping at the same time. So we're not just doing it for one particular audience or stakeholder in that audience, but that we have the chance to share the learnings. And that's one of the great things about philanthropy in terms of the public good and the charitable purpose of some of the investments that we make. But I think in terms of collective action, the opportunities around networking and what networks offer, networks of evaluators, networks of designers, networks of engineers and others to be able to come together and learn from one another and bring their different perspectives to particular problem spaces or issues is something that we like to offer as one part of our giving, if you will, to have that convening power to bring folks together to be thinking about that in a more collective fashion.
We have a question down front.
We're getting such amazing questions from people, and it's really hard. If we don't ask all of your questions, we're going to feed them in some other way. But I've got some great questions about data. And the question to you, Marc, is what happens with all the data you're collecting about everyone's emotions?
We're going to use it against them.
And a question to you and Doug. Let me do it properly. How do we avoid the consequence that all this stuff that we're measuring and collecting doesn't end up being some form of control over people?
I'll let you answer the second one. Just briefly, the app that we have is completely anonymous, so people, when they register, it's anonymous. So we don't use the data in any way that can be harmful. School systems that adopt the practices also use it anonymously and create different accounts for different levels. So you can have a district account, a classroom account, and it's really used to track data over time. So in one of our projects that we're starting in collaboration with Facebook, we are in this learning platform that they're building. We are tracking students a couple of times a day over time periods like weeks or months to show their trajectories of mood and look at how those moods correlate with their performance, finding out what's the cause of those mood states and the lack of performance, and then providing strategies to support them live.
Okay, so could I break for a second and ask the panel if they have any questions they'd like to field to the audience?
Well, I guess I'm curious. I have this big hypothesis that we haven't cracked the code on scale, and I guess I'm curious. Do you guys agree with that, or am I missing the big story here? I'd love to be challenged on that, or if you agree with it, then high five. Thoughts?
Here I have got two very interesting questions for Marc. Sorry, I throw the ball back to the stage. But I think that the question still is really interesting. Do you have data that shows how emotional intelligence training extend beyond the classroom and into family dynamics? This is one question. And the second question, what were the barriers to getting high schools to see the value in EI work, or how did you convince them otherwise? Two very
Sure, I'll do that
difficult
really
questions.
quickly. I'll go to the second one first. Part of the challenge with high school students in high schools is they're very large organizations. When you're doing preschool, it's kind of all about feelings. Elementary is a little bit. Middle school is kind of all about it, but nobody wants to talk about it. And then in high school, they've kind of been there, done that, and many educators think, well, they should have learned these skills earlier on. So we found in our research that students want to have a lot more voice. They want to have a lot more decision-making. So we've taken an approach that is not yet tested. We're just piloting it this year, where we're having students be the drivers and the change makers within their school. And then the other piece we've shown that the skills of emotional intelligence are predictive of things for students, for families, and businesses. So yes, the skills are universally useful.
Hi. A couple quick questions. The first is practical. I know a lot of people in here are probably sold on the idea of measuring impact, but are still looking for the right tools to do so. I don't know if any of you have come across any great dashboards that were useful in interpreting that data as it came in to measure the impact of design. And then another slightly more provocative one. We have people who have worked with Mayo, Rockefeller, Yale, IBM. To what degree are large institutions responsible for or capable of assisting or resisting social movements that we're talking about here today? So, which is kind of tossing back the scale question to you of, we've got a lot of people who are part of smaller organizations out here who are wondering to what degree you feel like you fit into that equation.
Capable, absolutely massively capable of influencing social movements. I mean, just without question. IBM's a company of 360,000 people. There's no way that population is not going to have an influence, right? The values of IBM as a company, as an organization, are certainly consistent with my values as a person and as a citizen, and I look at that very carefully, and I think about that a lot, and I look at how the company behaves in different situations, and symbolically and otherwise, and I'm just repeatedly pleased with that. A few examples in the history of IBM. For instance, IBM was a pioneer as a company in domestic partners getting access to health benefits back into the 80s. The earliest company to promote a woman into an executive role in the 50s. And people of color having meaningful roles of seniority in the company dating back decades before that. Always a pioneer in what are, for me, the important sort of social issues of the time. So it's a great, it becomes kind of a laboratory for a microcosm of the world, really, and a place where we can put some of these ideas to the test.
That is a great way, unfortunately, to end. Fortunately, it's great, but unfortunately, we have to end. You guys have been great to play with, so I guess the voice of God will tell us what's next, right? Thank you.
We will now take a lunch break.